A single flight from New York to Geneva, a luxurious business-class cabin, and a confrontation that would change 2 lives forever. For Dr. Emma Grace, it was the trip of a lifetime. For Andrew Scott, it was just another Tuesday. But when his arrogance led him to call the brilliant young black woman next to him poor and suggested she belonged in economy, he had no idea he was speaking to the one person who held his life and the lives of everyone on board in her hands. He thought his ticket gave him power, but he was about to learn what real value looks like when a single announcement from the cockpit doesn't just silence him, it shatters his entire world. The hum of the Global Air Alliance lounge at JFK was a familiar symphony to Dr. Emma Grace. It was a melody composed of quiet confidence, the gentle clinking of ice in glasses of premium scotch, and the soft, urgent tapping of fingers on the latest ultrabooks. For most of her 28 years, this world had been an abstract concept, something seen in movies. But now it was her reality, and the novelty still hadn't worn off. Emma smoothed down her tailored blazer, a deep navy that complemented her dark skin. Beneath it, a simple silk shell top and comfortable trousers completed an outfit that screamed understated elegance. She wasn't dressed to impress. She was dressed for a 9-hour flight, after which she would be accepting the prestigious Leroux Prize for Innovation in Aeronautical Safety in Geneva. Her work, a predictive AI system she'd codenamed Project Nightingale, was revolutionizing how airlines detected and managed potential mechanical failures before they ever became catastrophic. It was the culmination of her doctorate from MIT and 4 years of relentless coffee-fueled work. This business-class ticket wasn't an indulgence. It was a non-negotiable part of her prize package, a recognition of her value. Finding her seat 3B in the spacious pod-like configuration of the Boeing 777, she felt a familiar thrill. The window seat. Perfect. She carefully stowed her carry-on, which contained little more than her laptop, a change of clothes, and a well-loved copy of Carl Sagan's The Demon-Haunted World. As she settled into the plush leather, she took a deep breath, the scent of cabin fresh air and possibility filling her lungs. This was it, the flight that marked the transition from a promising academic to a world-renowned expert. The quiet sanctuary was soon interrupted. "Excuse me! Excuse me!" The voice was sharp, grating, and dripping with an entitlement that could curdle milk. Emma looked up from arranging her noise-canceling headphones. A man stood in the aisle impeccably dressed in a Brioni suit that was probably worth more than her first car. He was in his late 40s, with slicked-back salt-and-pepper hair, a florid complexion, and a gold watch that seemed to catch the light with deliberate aggression. He held a boarding pass in one hand, gesturing with it toward her seat as if it were a royal decree. "I believe you're in my seat," he said, not as a question, but as an accusation. 3A. Emma offered a polite, practiced smile. "Hi there. I'm actually in 3B, the window seat. I believe you're right next to me." The man whose name she would soon learn was Andrew Scott scoffed. He glanced at her boarding pass resting on the small console between the seats, then back at her, his eyes doing a slow, insulting appraisal of her from head to toe. It was a look she knew all too well, a calculus of race gender and perceived socioeconomic status that always ended with an incorrect sum. "I highly doubt that," he said, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial, condescending tone. "Listen, it's a simple mistake. A lot of people get confused. The economy cabin is toward the back of the plane. Perhaps one of the flight attendants can help you find your actual seat." The air crackled. The casual, dismissive racism was so blatant, it was almost theatrical. Emma felt a familiar heat rise in her chest, but she pushed it down. replacing it with the cool, methodical calm she employed when debugging a complex algorithm. Emotion would get her nowhere. Logic was her shield and her sword. "Sir, my boarding pass clearly says Seat 3B Business Class," she stated, her voice even and clear. She picked it up and held it for him to see. "I'm quite sure I'm in the right place. As I said, your Seat 3A is right here." She gestured to the empty aisle seat beside her. A senior flight attendant, a poised woman named Sarah, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, approached, having noticed the standoff. "Is there a problem here, sir?" Andrew Scott immediately turned his charm, or what he thought was charm, on Sarah. "Ah, yes. It seems this young lady has wandered a bit too far forward. I'm sure she didn't mean any harm, but my seat is 3A, and she's settled into this pod." He waved a dismissive hand at the entire two-seat area. Sarah's professional smile didn't falter, but her eyes hardened slightly. "Let me see your boarding pass, sir, and yours as well, ma'am." They both handed them over. Sarah scanned them with practiced efficiency. "Everything seems to be in order," she said, handing them back. "Mr. Scott, you're in 3A, the aisle seat. And Dr. Grace," she said, giving Emma a nod of respect, "you are in 3B. Enjoy your flight with us." The Dr. Grace seemed to go right over his head. All he heard was that he was wrong. A dark flush crept up his neck. He shoved his roller bag violently into the overhead compartment, the force of it shaking the small structure. He then collapsed into his seat with a theatrical sigh, pointedly angling his body away from Emma. Emma, hoping that was the end of it, put on her headphones and selected a calming playlist of lo-fi beats. But Scott wasn't done. He leaned across the console, forcing her to remove her headphones. "I just don't understand how someone like you can afford a ticket like this," he said, his voice a low, venomous whisper. The pretense of a misunderstanding was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated snobbery. "Did you use your boyfriend's points win a contest?" Emma stared at him, her composure a fortress. "I'm not sure that's any of your business." He smirked a cruel, thin line. "I just hate to see the standards slipping. This cabin used to be for serious professionals. Business people, not tourists." He said the word tourists like it was a contagion. "Look, I'll give you $500 cash right now if you'll swap seats with whoever is in 24C. You'd be more comfortable back there anyway with your own kind." The sheer audacity of the offer, the vile prejudice behind it, was breathtaking. $500. He thought he could buy her dignity, put a price tag on her right to exist in this space. He saw a young black woman, and his mind filled in a story of poverty and dependence. This time, Emma didn't hide her anger. It was a cold, sharp anger, not a hot, messy one. "Sir," she began, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying the weight of a thunderclap. "Let me be exceptionally clear. I am in this seat because I belong in this seat. My kind, as you so eloquently put it, are people who have earned their place. I will not be moving. I will not be entertaining your insults. And if you speak to me again outside of a life-or-death emergency, I will ask the cabin crew to have you removed from the flight." She punctuated her sentence by putting her headphones back on, turning the volume up just enough to drown out the world. She stared resolutely out the window, her heart hammering against her ribs. She saw Scott's reflection in the plexiglass, his face a mask of puce fury. He was speechless, not because he was chastened, but because he was enraged at being challenged. The battle line had been drawn at 35,000 feet, and the flight had only just begun. The initial ascent was a tense, silent affair. Andrew Scott fumed in his seat, pointedly taking up the entire shared armrest, and occasionally letting out an aggrieved sigh, loud enough to be heard over the engine's roar. He ordered a double whiskey from Sarah the moment they reached cruising altitude, downing it in 2 gulps before immediately requesting another. He was marinating in his own indignation. Emma, for her part, tried to create a bubble of tranquility. She opened her laptop, the screen illuminating her focused expression. On it were complex lines of code and differential equations, the digital guts of Project Nightingale. She was running a final diagnostic simulation, a nervous habit before any big presentation. Her system was already live on over 1,000 aircraft in the Global Air Alliance fleet, including, ironically, the very 777 they were on. The data stream from their own flight was feeding into her model in real time, a fact that gave her a small, secret sense of connection to the machine, carrying them across the Atlantic. She saw the flight attendants moving with a practiced grace, their smiles warm and their service impeccable. Sarah, in particular, seemed to make a point of checking on Emma, offering her a pre-poured glass of champagne with a knowing look that said, "I saw that, and I'm on your side." Emma accepted with a grateful smile. The small gesture of solidarity was an anchor in the turbulent atmosphere created by the man beside her. An hour into the flight, the meal service began. Scott, now on his 3rd whiskey, was determined to find fault in everything. "Is this salmon wild-caught Alaskan sockeye or farmed Atlantic?" he demanded of the flight attendant, offering the tray. When the young man admitted he didn't know the specific provenance, Scott waved it away with disgust. "Forget it. Just bring me the beef. I trust it's at least USDA prime." He ate with a kind of barely controlled savagery, his knife and fork clattering against the ceramic plate. He then proceeded to complain that the red wine, a perfectly respectable Bordeaux, was tepid and lacked character. Emma chose the pasta, eating slowly and deliberately, refusing to let his toxic energy spoil her meal. She watched a movie on the in-flight entertainment system, the dialogue a meaningless hum in her ears. Her mind, however, was elsewhere. It was ticking away, processing the subtle cues of the environment around her. She was a data scientist, after all. Her brain was trained to see patterns in the noise. And there was noise. Not just Scott's grumbling. It was something else. A faint, almost imperceptible vibration that she could feel through the floor of the aircraft. It wasn't the judder of turbulence. It was a high-frequency thrum, a dissonance in the otherwise smooth symphony of flight. To anyone else, it was nothing. To her, whose entire career was based on listening to the secret language of machines, it was a whisper. She discreetly minimized her movie and pulled up the live diagnostic feed from the aircraft's sensors. A cascade of numbers and graphs filled her screen. Engine performance, cabin pressure, hydraulic fluid temperatures, electrical output, a complete digital health chart of the plane. Her eyes scanned the data, looking for the source of the whisper. There. The starboard engine, engine 2. The EGT exhaust gas temperature was fluctuating. Not by much, just a few degrees Celsius, but the fluctuations were erratic, forming a pattern that was inconsistent with normal operations at a stable cruising altitude. Furthermore, the N2 rotor speed sensor was showing micro-variations, tiny flickers in the data stream that were almost invisible. Her heart rate quickened. Project Nightingale was designed to catch exactly this kind of ghost in the machine. A human analyst looking at the same data might dismiss it as sensor noise, a statistical anomaly. But her AI, trained on millions of hours of flight data from both normal operations and past incidents, would recognize the signature. It was the faint digital precursor to a potential fuel pump malfunction. In most cases, it would lead to nothing. But in a handful of scenarios, it could precede a cascading failure leading to an engine flameout. She watched her own program at work on her screen. In the airline's central operations hub, thousands of miles away, Project Nightingale would already be flagging this. An alert, color-coded yellow for caution would have popped up on a maintenance supervisor's screen. The system wasn't just an alarm, it was a diagnostician. It would be cross-referencing the EGT and N2 sensor data with the maintenance logs for this specific engine, its age and its time since the last service. Scott, oblivious, had finished his meal and was now loudly conducting a video call with someone on the ground, using the plane's Wi-Fi. "No, Thompson, you tell the Swiss team that we don't budge on the 12% margin. They need our logistics platform more than we need their business. Play hardball." He was practically shouting, ensuring the whole cabin knew he was a big shot, a deal maker. Emma barely heard him. She was focused on the numbers. The EGT fluctuation spiked for a moment, then settled. The N2 sensor data smoothed out. The whisper had faded. Perhaps it was just an anomaly, but her system was built on the principle that there were no true anomalies, only patterns you didn't understand yet. She leaned her head back against the seat, closing her eyes. She felt a profound sense of responsibility. Her name, her code, was woven into the very fabric of this aircraft's safety net. She had created a silent guardian, and right now she was praying it was doing its job. Suddenly, a small chime echoed through the cabin, the kind that usually precedes an announcement from the flight deck. A moment later, the captain's voice, calm, professional, and distinctly female, came over the intercom. "Good evening, folks. This is Captain Rostova from the flight deck. We're just crossing over the coast of Newfoundland and have about 5.5 hours left of our journey to Geneva. Apologies for the interruption, but we've just been asked to take a slightly more northerly route by air traffic control due to some weather patterns developing ahead. It may add a few minutes to our flight time, but we'll still be arriving on schedule. We'll have the cabin lights dimmed shortly for those of you wishing to get some rest." It was a standard, reassuring announcement, but Emma knew it wasn't the whole truth. A northerly route change might be for weather, but it could also be a precautionary measure to keep the plane closer to viable emergency landing sites like Gander or St. John's. The pilots and the operations center were talking to her AI. They were listening to its whispers. The chess pieces were moving quietly and professionally out of sight of the passengers. All except one. Emma looked at the screen again. The data from Engine 2 remained stable, but the yellow flag from Nightingale would still be active. They were watching and waiting. Beside her, Andrew Scott had ended his call and was reclining his seat, pulling an eye mask over his face, completely ignorant of the invisible high-stakes drama unfolding in the digital and physical world around him. He was asleep in a world he thought he owned, while a young black woman he had dismissed as poor watched over his safety with an invention he could never comprehend. For the next 2 hours, the cabin settled into the familiar rhythm of a transatlantic night flight. The lights were dimmed to a deep, calming blue. Most passengers were asleep, cocooned in their pods, their faces occasionally illuminated by the flicker of a movie screen. The only sounds were the constant, powerful drone of the engines and the quiet footsteps of the flight attendants making their rounds. Emma couldn't sleep. Adrenaline and professional responsibility coursed through her veins. She kept her laptop open, dimming the screen to its lowest setting. She wasn't interfering. She was simply observing the work of her creation from a unique vantage point. It was like a composer sitting in the audience, listening to their symphony being performed for the first time in a life-or-death concert. The data stream from Engine 2 remained deceptively calm. The EGT and N2 sensor readings had stabilized, returning to their normal operational parameters. Any human observer would have downgraded the alert, sighing in relief. This was the exact scenario where human error and complacency often crept in. It was just a flicker. a false positive. But Project Nightingale didn't feel relief. It didn't have emotions. It had logic, and it had memory. It remembered that this specific pattern of stabilization after fluctuation had preceded a Stage 2 fuel pump failure on a 787 6 months prior over the Pacific. It was a rare correlation, a 1 in a million statistical ghost, but it was there. The yellow flag on the monitors back at Global Air Alliance's headquarters in Atlanta would not have disappeared. It would have held steady, a persistent digital warning. Up in the cockpit, Captain Eva Rostova and her first officer would be in quiet, professional communication with the ground. They'd know about the AI's flag. They would have likely performed their own system checks, finding nothing amiss on their instruments. It would be a textbook case of a conflict between human observation and machine prediction. Trust the seasoned pilot's gut and the clean instrument panel, or trust the black box algorithm. This was the very debate Emma had faced for years from skeptical industry veterans. They called it over-reliance on tech. She called it listening to a million years of experience in a microsecond. A soft chime, different from the captain's announcement, rang through the forward galley. Sarah and another flight attendant who had been resting immediately stood up, their expressions suddenly serious. They exchanged a few hushed words, their movements becoming more precise, less relaxed. Sarah began a slow, deliberate walk down the aisle, her eyes scanning not the passengers, but the cabin infrastructure itself, the ceiling panels, the window frames, the floor. She was looking for something, her training on high alert. Andrew Scott snorted in his sleep, his head lolling to one side. He was oblivious. Emma felt it again. The vibration. It was back more pronounced this time. A low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the very soul of the aircraft. She looked out the window at the massive engine hanging under the wing, a titan of engineering silhouetted against the moonlit clouds. It looked perfect, serene. But her screen told her a different story. The EGT was spiking again, this time higher. The N2 rotor was lagging ever so slightly. And a new sensor had joined the chorus, the oil pressure monitor. It was beginning to dip. There it is, she thought, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. The unraveling thread. The pattern was now undeniable. This wasn't a ghost anymore. It was a clear and present danger. Back in Atlanta, the alert would have escalated from yellow to orange. On the flight deck, a cascade of amber caution lights would be illuminating the panel. The interior lights of the cabin suddenly flickered once, twice, before stabilizing. A few sleeping passengers stirred. A man in seat 4D looked up, a confused expression on his face. Scott was jolted awake by the flicker. He ripped off his eye mask, disoriented. "What the hell was that?" he grumbled to no one in particular. "Can't even keep the lights on. For $10,000 a ticket." He noticed Emma was awake, her face bathed in the glow of her laptop. "Still playing with your little computer?" He sneered, his voice thick with sleep and condescension. "You should really get some rest. You look stressed." Before Emma could even formulate a reply, the plane gave a sudden violent lurch. It wasn't turbulence. It was a sideways yawing motion, as if a giant hand had shoved the aircraft's tail. A collective gasp swept through the cabin. A few unsecured items slid from consoles. Scott grabbed his armrest, his knuckles turning white. "What's going on?" he demanded, his voice now laced with genuine fear. The captain's voice came over the PA system again, and this time the calm, folksy tone was gone. It was replaced by a clipped, authoritative command. "Flight attendants, take your seats immediately. Passengers, remain seated and fasten your seatbelts." There was no explanation. No reassurance, just an order. That was more terrifying than any description of a problem could ever be. The powerful drone of the engine suddenly changed pitch. The deep, symmetrical hum that had been the background music of their flight became unbalanced. The sound from the right side of the aircraft dropped away, replaced by a strange, whistling silence. The plane banked sharply to the left. Scott's face was a pale, sweaty mask of terror. "The engine. I think an engine is out," he stammered. His eyes wide, darting around the cabin as if looking for an exit. All his bluster, his arrogance, his meticulously constructed persona of a man in charge had evaporated in an instant, revealing the terrified child beneath. He turned to Emma, his eyes pleading. You have your computer. Can you check the news? See what's happening?" The irony was so thick Emma could have choked on it. The man who had mocked her for being on her little computer was now looking to it as a source of salvation. She simply looked at him, then at her screen where a stark red banner had just appeared, generated by her own code being executed on a server a continent away. Alert, critical, engine 2, cascade, failure imminent, recommended action immediate shutdown, and initiate diversion protocol. Project Nightingale had made its call. Emma looked out the window. As if on cue, she saw the engine's navigation lights blink out. The pilots had listened. They had trusted the machine. They had shut it down. They were now flying over the dark, icy expanse of the North Atlantic on a single engine, and the only reason they'd had the time to do it in a controlled, preemptive manner before a catastrophic, uncontained failure was because of the very woman Andrew Scott had deemed too poor to share his airspace. The silence that followed the engine shutdown was more terrifying than any noise. The 777 is certified and fully capable of flying on a single engine, but to the passengers, the sudden asymmetry of sound was profoundly unnatural. The cabin, once a bubble of placid transit, was now a tinderbox of anxiety. Hushed, fearful whispers spread like wildfire. People were gripping their armrests, their faces stark with fear in the dim emergency lighting that had automatically activated. Andrew Scott was a wreck. The man who had commanded boardrooms and belittled strangers was now whimpering his breath, coming in short, ragged gasps. "Oh God, we're going to crash. I knew it. I knew I should have taken the corporate jet," he muttered, a litany of panicked regret. He kept looking from the window to Emma's laptop, his brain unable to process the situation beyond raw, primal fear. Emma, by contrast, was an island of preternatural calm. Her initial adrenaline rush had subsided, replaced by a clinical focus. She watched the data stream as the pilots and her system worked in tandem. The flight path on her screen showed a clear, decisive turn eastward back toward land. Gander, Newfoundland. The diversion protocol was in effect. The remaining engine's stats were green across the board, taking the full load exactly as it was designed to. Everything was proceeding by the book, a book that her work had helped to rewrite. Sarah and the other flight attendants were now moving through the cabin, their voices firm but reassuring. "Please remain calm. Fasten your seatbelts tightly. The captain will update us shortly." Their professionalism in the face of potential disaster was a testament to their training. Sarah caught Emma's eye as she passed, giving a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if acknowledging they were in this together. 10 minutes, which felt like an eternity, passed. The plane flew on stable and level. The initial terror in the cabin began to recede, replaced by a tense, simmering unease. Then the chime for an announcement sounded again. Every passenger looked up at the ceiling speakers, their breath held. This would be it, the explanation, the verdict on their fate. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Rostova again. Her voice was still a paragon of control, but now it carried a new weight, a gravity that commanded absolute attention. As you have no doubt noticed, we have shut down our number 2 engine, the engine on the right side of the aircraft. I want to assure you all that this aircraft is designed to fly perfectly safely on a single engine, and our flight crew is trained extensively for this exact scenario. We are not in any immediate danger. A collective audible sigh of relief washed through the cabin. Scott unclenched his fists, some color returning to his face. However, the captain continued, and the tension snapped back into place. I want to be transparent with you all about what just happened. We experienced a critical malfunction in a primary fuel pump for the starboard engine. Left unchecked, this situation had the potential to become extremely serious. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Ordinarily, we might not have caught an issue like this until it triggered major cascading alerts in the cockpit. But tonight, we were fortunate. In fact, we were more than fortunate. We were protected. Another pause. Emma's heart was pounding. She knew what was coming. Our entire fleet at Global Air Alliance is equipped with a new generation of predictive safety software. It's an artificial intelligence system that monitors thousands of data points a second, detecting anomalies that are invisible to the human eye long before they become emergencies. Tonight, that system flagged the erratic behavior of the fuel pump nearly 2 hours before the situation became critical. It advised us to alter our course for precautionary reasons, and it gave us the crucial minutes we needed to analyze the data consult with our ground-based engineering teams and perform a controlled preventative shutdown, rather than reacting to a catastrophic failure at 37,000 feet. A murmur of awe and gratitude spread through the passengers. They were realizing they had been pulled back from a precipice they never even knew they were on. The system is called Project Nightingale, Captain Rostova said, her voice swelling with pride and relief. And we have the architect, the lead designer of that very system on board with us today. The world seemed to stop. For Emma, the hum of the remaining engine, the creak of the fuselage, everything faded into a dull roar. Andrew Scott, who had been listening with rapt attention, looked confused. He glanced around this cabin expecting some distinguished gray-haired professor or a Silicon Valley tech bro in a hoodie to be acknowledged. Captain Rostova's voice came back clear as a bell imbued with a profound respect that cut through the cabin's tense air. On behalf of the entire crew of Flight 282 Global Air Alliance, and I'm sure every single person on this plane tonight, I would like to extend our deepest, most profound gratitude to Dr. Emma Grace in Seat 3B. Dr. Grace, your genius, your work, it didn't just prevent an incident tonight. It saved lives. Every head in the business class cabin swiveled. Every pair of eyes locked onto Seat 3B, onto Emma, and onto the man sitting beside her. Andrew Scott's brain seemed to short-circuit, the gears visibly ground to a halt as he tried to connect the dots. Dr. Emma Grace, Seat 3B, the woman I called poor, the woman I told to go to economy, the woman whose little computer I mocked, the woman who just saved my life. His face, which had been pale with fear, now went completely ashen. It was the color of death. The blood drained from it so fast he looked like a marble statue. His jaw hung slack, his mouth slightly open, a silent "oh" of utter soul-crushing disbelief. The sneer, the arrogance, the self-importance, it all crumbled away, leaving behind the hollow shell of a man staring into the abyss of his own monumental, life-threatening ignorance. He slowly, mechanically turned his head to look at Emma. Her calm demeanor, which he had mistaken for weakness, now looked like superhuman strength. Her focused gaze, which he had seen as unsophisticated, was now the look of a guardian angel. He wasn't just wrong about her seat. He was wrong about everything. And his mistake was so cosmically, so profoundly enormous that it had sucked all the air from his lungs. He sat there frozen, speechless, as a soft, then growing wave of applause for the young woman beside him filled the cabin. The applause was surreal. It started with a few passengers in the rows ahead who turned in their seats to clap, their faces filled with a mixture of awe and immense gratitude. It spread quickly, a ripple of sound that became a wave washing over the entire business-class cabin. People were smiling, nodding some, even raising their glasses in a silent toast to Emma. They weren't just clapping for an abstract concept. They were clapping for the quiet, composed young woman who had been sitting among them, a silent protector. Emma felt a blush creep up her neck, unaccustomed to such public displays. She gave a small, shy wave, a gesture that felt wholly inadequate. Andrew Scott, however, remained frozen. The applause was like a series of physical blows, each clap a judgment against him. He was trapped in a spotlight of his own making, illuminated by the brilliance of the woman he had tried so desperately to diminish. He wanted to shrink, to disappear into the plush leather of his seat, but there was nowhere to hide. He could feel the stares of the other passengers, and in their eyes he saw not only admiration for Emma, but also a dawning comprehension of the scene that must have played out earlier. The man in 4D who had witnessed the initial boarding confrontation gave Scott a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. The flight attendant, Sarah, was the first to approach. She knelt by Emma's seat, her expression one of profound personal thanks. "Dr. Grace," she said, her voice thick with emotion. There aren't words. Thank you. On behalf of my crew, thank you." "You were all incredible," Emma replied honestly. "Your professionalism was what kept everyone calm." Sarah then stood up and looked at Andrew Scott. Her kind professional mask was gone, replaced by an expression of glacial disdain. She didn't say a word to him. She didn't have to. The look was enough. It stripped him of his status, his perceived importance, and his business-class privilege more effectively than any verbal reprimand could have. In that moment, he wasn't a valued customer. He was a piece of cargo that had behaved badly. She then turned and walked back to the galley. The flight continued its slow, steady descent toward Gander International Airport. The atmosphere in the cabin had been irrevocably transformed. An impromptu, hushed receiving line formed in the aisle as passengers one by one took a moment to walk past seat 3B. "Thank you, Doctor. Truly," said a woman from the back of the cabin. An elderly gentleman, James, who had been sitting across the aisle, leaned over. "My grandchildren were waiting for me in Geneva," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Because of you, I'll get to see them. God bless you." He reached out and gently squeezed her arm. Each word of thanks was another nail in the coffin of Andrew Scott's ego. He sat ramrod straight, staring at the seatback in front of him, his world reduced to a 15-inch screen displaying the flight path. He could feel the burn of Emma's presence beside him. The air around her was now charged with respect and admiration, while his was thick with shame. He who defined himself by his status had become a pariah. The woman he saw as a nobody had become the most important person on the plane. The power dynamic had not just flipped, it had been annihilated and rebuilt from scratch. When the plane finally touched down on the tarmac in Gander, a small Canadian town suddenly playing host to a giant of international travel, another round of applause broke out. These were the sounds of relief, of survival. As the plane taxied to the gate, Captain Rostova came on the PA one last time. "Folks, we'll be deplaning here. Global Air Alliance representatives are already at the gate to assist you with accommodation and rebooking. And Dr. Grace, if you could please remain in your seat for a moment after we've docked. We have a representative from the executive team who would like to speak with you personally." It was the final, brutal confirmation. Emma was a VIP to be personally feted by the airline's top brass. Scott was just part of the herd, left to navigate the logistical chaos with everyone else. The seatbelt sign pinged off. As the passengers began to gather their belongings, a palpable space cleared around seats 3A and 3B. No one wanted to crowd the hero, and no one wanted to be near the fool. Scott moved like a robot, his motions stiff and jerky. He opened the overhead bin, retrieved his bag, and stood in the aisle, refusing to make eye contact with anyone, especially Emma. As he shuffled forward with the slow-moving line of deplaning passengers, he had to pass Captain Rostova, who was standing at the cockpit door thanking people as they left. When she saw Scott, her professional smile vanished. She looked him dead in the eye, her gaze as sharp and cold as the Newfoundland air. "I understand you had some concerns about the standards in our business class cabin, Mr. Scott." She said, her voice low, but carrying clearly. "Let me assure you our standards are just fine. It's yours that seem to be lacking." Andrew Scott visibly flinched as if he'd been slapped. He couldn't form a response. He just stumbled past her and out the door, his expensive suit now feeling like a costume of shame. Emma remained in her seat, watching him go. She felt no triumph, no glee. Just a profound sense of exhaustion and a strange, hollow pity for a man so blinded by his own prejudice that he couldn't see the humanity, let alone the genius in the person sitting right next to him. A moment later, a man in a crisp suit, his face a mixture of relief and reverence, appeared at her seat. "Dr. Grace, I'm David Chen, Vice President of Atlantic Operations. On behalf of the CEO, the board, and every employee at this airline, I don't know where to begin." His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his eyes went wide. He looked back at Emma. "You won't believe this," he said. "The story is already breaking. Someone on the flight, a journalist, they've live-tweeted the whole thing. The announcement, your name, everything. You're going viral." The Gander Airport terminal, usually a quiet, sleepy gateway to Newfoundland, was buzzing with the dislocated energy of the diverted flight. Passengers were clustered around the Global Air Alliance counter, anxiously trying to rebook their travel. But the dominant sound wasn't frustration. It was the excited chatter of people sharing a story, their story, with the world. Andrew Scott found a secluded corner, sank into a hard plastic chair, and pulled out his phone. He needed to call his boss, Mr. Thompson. He needed to get ahead of this to spin the narrative of the delayed deal in Geneva. But the moment his phone connected to the airport Wi-Fi, it began to convulse. A flood of notifications, a digital tidal wave crashed over his screen. Text messages, emails, missed calls, and an avalanche of alerts from LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. His thumb trembled as he tapped on a text from a colleague in his company's PR department. It contained a single link and a 4-letter word, duck. He clicked the link. It took him to a viral Twitter thread from a user named @TravelTom, who was until an hour ago just another passenger in seat 7K. But Tom was also a travel blogger with a respectable following. His first tweet, sent shortly after the captain's announcement, was an explosion online. "Unbelievable. On @Global Air Flight 282 mid-flight engine failure over the Atlantic. But the real story, the plane and all our lives were just saved by a predictive AI system. And the woman who invented it is sitting in seat 3B. Her name is Dr. Emma Grace. A true hero. Flight 282. Project Nightingale. The tweet had thousands of retweets in minutes. But it was the replies and the replies to the replies that turned Andrew's blood to ice. Another passenger, the man from 4D, had chimed in. At Travel Tom, you're missing the craziest part. Guy in 3A, a real piece of work in a fancy suit, spent the first hour of the flight harassing Dr. Grace, told her she didn't belong in business class, offered her cash to move to economy. The cosmic karma is absolutely breathtaking. That was the spark. The internet did the rest. Within minutes, online sleuths had cross-referenced the flight, the destination, and the description of a fancy suit with passengers who had posted about their business travel. Andrew's own LinkedIn profile, which proudly listed his upcoming strategic partnership meeting in Geneva with Viridian Dynamics, was a digital breadcrumb. His photo was found. His name was attached. And a hashtag was born, Business Class Bully. It was trending, globally. He watched in horror as his life was dissected and destroyed in real time. Memes were already appearing, his smug corporate headshot next to a picture of Emma captioned, "He flies business class. She is the business." His company Viridian Dynamics was being tagged in thousands of posts. Their social media pages were being flooded with angry comments demanding action. Hey, at Viridian Dynamics, is this how your executives represent your company? Racism and arrogance at 35,000 feet. Fire Andrew Scott. Business class bully. His phone buzzed with an incoming call, the caller ID flashing a name that made his stomach drop. Thompson, his CEO. He scrambled to his feet, walking toward a quieter hallway to take the call. His hands were slick with sweat. Andrew, Thompson's voice was arctic, devoid of any preamble. What did you do? Arthur, it's a misunderstanding. Andrew began, his voice cracking. The passenger. She was in my seat. I was confused. Save it. Thompson cut him off, his voice like shattering glass. I don't care about your confusion, Andrew. What I care about is that my phone has been ringing off the hook for the last 30 minutes. First, from our head of communications, who is watching our company's reputation get torched live on the internet. And second, and far more importantly, from Jean-Pierre Lacroix. Andrew felt a cold dread seep into his bones. Jean-Pierre Lacroix was the CEO of the Swiss tech firm. He was supposed to meet the firm whose multi-million-dollar logistics contract was meant to be the crowning achievement of his career. Lacroix, Thompson continued, his voice seething with rage, is on the board of the foundation that awards the LaRue Prize. He personally nominated Dr. Emma Grace this year. He considers her a personal friend. He saw the tweet, Andrew. He saw your name. And his exact words to me were, anyone who treats the future of my industry with such vile disrespect will never do business with me. The deal is off. Forever. Andrew leaned against the wall, the strength gone from his legs. Arthur, please, I can fix this. I can apologize. Apologize. You are a walking public relations catastrophe. You didn't just insult a passenger, you insulted a globally recognized genius who our potential client reveres. You cost this company the biggest deal of the decade. You are a liability, a disgrace, and as of this exact moment, an ex-employee of Viridian Dynamics. Your access has been revoked. Security is already at your office. We'll courier your personal effects. Don't ever contact this company again. The line went dead. Andrew stared at his phone, the silence on the other end, a roaring abyss. Fired. The deal, his masterpiece, vaporized. His career, meticulously built over 2 decades, annihilated in a single stupid, arrogant conversation. He stumbled back into the main terminal, his face a mask of utter despair. He saw Emma across the hall. She was surrounded by grateful airline officials. David Chen was personally booking her on a private charter jet that the airline had scrambled to get her to Geneva in time for her award ceremony. She wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was a queen holding court. She looked up, and for a brief second her eyes met his across the crowded room. There was no malice in her gaze, no triumph, just a quiet, lingering disappointment. That look was worse than any hatred. It was the look of someone who had expected better of humanity and had been proven wrong. His phone buzzed again. It was an email from Global Air Alliance, subject notice of policy violation. "Dear Mr. Scott," it began, "due to your documented disruptive and abusive behavior towards a fellow passenger and a clear violation of our passenger code of conduct as corroborated by crew and multiple passenger witnesses, you have been permanently banned from all flights operated by Global Air Alliance and our Sky Connect partners, effective immediately." He had lost his job, his deal, and now his preferred airline, all within the span of an hour. The intricate, privileged world he had built for himself had been brought down by a single thread of prejudice he couldn't resist pulling. The world for Andrew Scott had shrunk to the size of a budget airline ticket confirmation on his phone screen. After being unceremoniously fired and banned from Global Air Alliance, he was stranded in Gander, a ghost at the feast of his own making. The charter jet arranged for Emma had taken off hours ago, a silver streak, climbing into the night sky, carrying her toward accolades and a future brighter than ever. Andrew's future was a bleak, uncertain fog. He had to get home to New York. Every major airline was booked solid for days, filled with the rerouted passengers from his own flight. His last resort was a notoriously no-frills carrier, Sparrow Air, which had a single seat left on a flight to Newark via a layover in Halifax. The price was exorbitant, a final insult from the universe. He paid it without flinching the numbers on the screen, just another part of his waking nightmare. Boarding the Sparrow Air flight was a descent into a specific kind of hell he had only ever viewed with contempt from the premium security line. The plane was a cramped Airbus A320, the seats worn the air stale. There was no Zone 1 boarding, just a chaotic scrum of people pushing their way down a narrow aisle. His seat was 32B, the last row, a middle seat, wedged between a large man who immediately fell asleep and began to snore, and a young mother with a crying baby in her lap. The seat didn't recline, pressed as it was against the bulkhead of the rear lavatories. The stench of blue chemical toilet freshener was overpowering. As he squeezed into his designated sliver of space, his knees jammed against the seat in front of him. The irony was so crushingly perfect it was almost poetic. He, Andrew Scott, who had offered a woman of genius $500 to move to economy, with her own kind, was now in a seat that made standard economy look like a palace. He had become the caricature of the poor person he had imagined Emma to be. The flight was miserable. The baby cried. The man beside him snored. The line for the lavatory was a constant shuffling presence at his elbow. There was no meal service, only a sad little cart offering lukewarm soft drinks and bags of pretzels for $5. He thought of the wild-caught salmon and the Bordeaux he had complained about just 24 hours earlier, and a wave of nauseating regret washed over him. He had been a king in a castle, and had never even realized it, too busy complaining that the marble wasn't polished to his liking. During the layover in Halifax, he sat huddled in a corner of the terminal, scrolling through the news. The story of Flight 282 was everywhere. CNN, BBC, Forbes. They all hailed Dr. Emma Grace as a hero of the modern age. There were photos of her from her MIT days, interviews with former professors praising her brilliance, and think pieces about the power of her AI to change the world. And in every article, there was a paragraph, a footnote, to her heroism about the disgraced Viridian Dynamics executive, whose prejudiced comments provided the dramatic backdrop to the story. They used his name. They showed his picture. He wasn't just fired, he was infamous. He was the villain in her story, a cautionary tale for the ages. His final flight from Halifax to Newark was more of the same. He sat in silence, a ghost of a man in a cheap suit, stripped of everything that had once defined him. The arrogance was gone, the entitlement scoured away by humiliation. All that was left was a raw, aching shame. He finally landed at Newark late the next night, exhausted and broken. As he waited for the shuttle bus to the long-term parking lot, he saw a TV in the terminal bar. On the screen was a live feed from Geneva. A beautifully dressed Dr. Emma Grace was at a podium accepting the LaRue Prize. "This award isn't just for me," she was saying, her voice clear and strong, resonating with a power he had so foolishly failed to recognize. "It's for every young girl, especially every young black girl, who has ever been told she doesn't belong in the lab, in the boardroom, or in the cockpit. It's for everyone who has ever been judged not by the content of their character or the quality of their mind, but by the color of their skin or the assumptions of others. Our potential is not limited by their prejudice. Our place is not determined by their permission. We belong wherever our dreams and our hard work take us." The audience in Geneva erupted into a thunderous standing ovation. On the screen, Emma smiled a genuine, radiant smile of pure, hard-won triumph. Andrew Scott stood on the curb in the cold New Jersey night, watching the woman he had tried to put in her place take her place on top of the world. The shuttle bus arrived with a hiss of its air brakes, its destination sign glowing dimly, economy parking. He picked up his bag, and for the first time in his life, got on completely and utterly anonymous, just another passenger heading toward a much smaller future. The karma wasn't just hard, it was meticulous. That night, Andrew Scott learned a lesson that no business school could ever teach. True status isn't about the seat you buy, but the value you bring to the world, Doctor. Emma Grace's journey was a powerful testament to the fact that brilliance knows no color and intellect has no social class. The same system she built to predict engine failure could never have predicted the failure of one man's character. His arrogance cost him everything, while her genius quietly saved everyone. Karma, it turns out, has a way of making sure everyone ends up in the seat they truly deserve. If you believe karma served a 5-star gourmet meal on this flight, hit that like button to show your support. Share this story with anyone who needs a reminder that prejudice is a baggage that will only weigh you down. And for more tales of justice from 35,000 feet, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. You never know whose story we'll tell next.